It was one of those evenings where the air itself seemed to shimmer with expectation. Soft strings of a waltz spilling through the open French windows, mingling with the scent of white roses and rain-damp lawns. The guests of Lady Isabel Charnwood moved like polished chess pieces across the marble floor of her ballroom, each smiling, each pretending, each concealing something. The occasion was the 21st birthday of Miss Marianne Charnwood, Lady Isabel's only daughter, a vision in ivory satin and pearls, whose laughter was the bright centerpiece of the evening. The orchestra had just begun the third movement of the Blue Danube when something in the atmosphere shifted, the kind of subtle disturbance that only certain people notice. One of those people was Captain Arthur Fielding, who paused mid-conversation by the punch bowl. The other was Lady Isabel herself, her fan momentarily frozen in her hand. At precisely 11 o'clock, Marianne Charnwood excused herself from the dance floor, saying something to her fiancé, Mr. Julian Harwood, about feeling faint. She disappeared through the mirrored doors leading to the west terrace. The waltz continued without her. By midnight, the music had stopped. A scream, sharp, high, and tearing through the polite chatter like a blade, echoed from the terrace. Then came the rush of footsteps, the cries for help, and the sudden, dreadful silence that follows only one kind of discovery. Marianne Charnwood was found lying on the flagstones beneath the great oak balcony. Her dress was torn, her neck twisted at an impossible angle, and on the stone beside her hand, glimmering faintly in the light from the ballroom, was a single silver music box, shaped like a heart. When opened, it played a soft, mechanical version of the birthday waltz. The investigation began before the guests had even left the ballroom. The local constabulary, led by Inspector Graves, arrived with the efficient gravity of men who had seen too much and understood too little. They examined the balcony, the footprints, the railing, and quickly pronounced it an accident. She slipped, the inspector concluded. The rain made the stones treacherous. Tragic, yes, but not suspicious. Lady Isabel did not reply. Her expression was composed, but her eyes were fixed on the music box. It was then, just as the coroner's men began their somber work, that a small, immaculately dressed gentleman appeared at the edge of the crowd. His mustache was as sharp as his gaze, his patent leather shoes unspotted despite the wet gravel. He carried no official air, yet every officer stepped aside without knowing quite why. "Ah," said the gentleman softly, surveying the scene. "A fate that ends in death. How inconvenient, for everyone." Lady Isabel turned, startled. "Monsieur Poirot?" Hercule Poirot bowed. "At your service, madame. I had the privilege of meeting your late husband in Monte Carlo many years ago. He once expressed a singular wish, that should misfortune ever visit Charnwood Hall, I might be consulted. It appears fate has obliged." Inspector Graves frowned. "I'm sure that won't be necessary, sir. We have the situation well in hand." "Indeed?" Poirot's eyebrows rose delicately. "And yet you have not asked why the young lady left the ballroom. You have not inquired who wound the music box. You have not wondered, perhaps, whether the terrace was the intended destination or the stage of something else entirely." The inspector bristled. "Are you implying foul play?" Poirot's smile was faint. "Mon ami, I imply nothing. I observe." By the time the last carriage had rolled down the gravel drive, Poirot had made his first tour of the ballroom and terrace. He paused beside the broken balcony rail, running a gloved finger lightly along the edge. Then he crouched near the fallen music box, its melody faintly distorted, as though some mechanism inside were misaligned. "Curious," he murmured. "An object of sentiment, not of value. And yet it is placed so, theatrically. Almost as though our poor mademoiselle wished to be found with it, or wished someone else to see it there." Behind him, a low voice spoke. "You think someone killed her?" It was Julian Harwood, his face pale beneath his dark hair. He was still in evening dress, the sleeve of his coat torn at the seam. "I think," said Poirot gently, "that Mademoiselle Charnwood did not fall as simply as the rain upon the grass. Tell me, monsieur, what passed between you before she left the dance floor?" Julian hesitated. "Nothing of importance." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "There is no such thing, my friend. A trifle, a tone, a single word may reveal the heart entire. You quarreled?" Julian exhaled. "Yes. She said she couldn't go through with it, the engagement. She said she had learned something about me." "And did she name her informant?" "No." He looked up sharply. "You don't think—" Poirot raised a hand. "Think, no. Observe, yes. It is curious, is it not, that the young lady chooses her own birthday to make a confession that leads to death. A date of happiness becomes one of tragedy. There is, as the English say, symbolism." That night, long after the police had left, Poirot sat in the silent drawing-room, his reflection caught in the mirrored mantelpiece. Rain whispered against the windows, and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock marked the passage of thought. On the low table before him lay 3 objects: the broken piece of balcony railing, the silver music box, and a dance card with every name carefully crossed out, except one: Captain Arthur Fielding. Poirot smiled to himself. "Bon," he whispered. "Already the pattern begins. The waltz is not yet finished, only its first movement has been played." The following morning dawned grey and brittle, a reluctant light creeping through the fog that lingered over Charnwood Hall. The lawns were streaked with dew, and the footprints left by policemen and guests alike had turned the soft earth into a record of confusion. Inside, silence reigned. The laughter, the waltz, the music, all seemed impossibly distant now, as if they had belonged to another world entirely. Poirot descended the grand staircase with measured calm, his hands neatly clasped behind his back. Every detail of the house, from the symmetry of the portraits to the placement of the vases, pleased him. Order, he thought, was the true sign of civilization. And yet, he paused, frowning slightly. Beneath this order there was something awry, like a painting hung just a little askew. In the breakfast room, Inspector Graves sat hunched over his tea, his expression grim. Lady Isabel occupied the head of the table, her complexion pale but her bearing untouched by the night's horror. Across from her, Julian Harwood stared into his untouched cup, while Captain Fielding examined the morning paper without reading a word. Poirot entered without announcement, though his presence was instantly felt. "Bon matin," he said lightly. "Though perhaps the morning brings little joy, eh?" Lady Isabel's voice was steady, almost formal. "Monsieur Poirot, I've spoken with the inspector. He insists that an inquest will be held, though he still believes my daughter's death was accidental." Poirot inclined his head. "And you, madame?" She hesitated, her gloved fingers tightening around her napkin. A mother knows when something is unnatural. Poirot nodded gravely. "Ah, you feel as I do. There is discord in this harmony. A waltz that began in 3 time but ended abruptly." The inspector sighed. "Monsieur Poirot, if you've come to conduct an inquiry, I'll not stop you. But unless you've found something I haven't, there's no sign of struggle, no witness, no weapon. Only that music box." Poirot's eyes flicked toward it. It now rested on a side table, polished and harmless-looking. "Every crime leaves its trace, mon ami. Sometimes the trace is not in what is found, but in what is missing." Julian Harwood spoke then, his voice hoarse. "You mean someone took something from her?" Poirot turned his gaze upon him. "Perhaps. Or perhaps something was added, Monsieur Harwood. An idea, a deception, a whisper. Tell me, when Mademoiselle Charnwood left the ballroom, who saw her go?" Captain Fielding lowered the paper. "I did." She passed near me on her way to the terrace doors. I thought she was merely seeking air. She looked distracted. Did anyone follow? Poirot asked. No, said Fielding after a pause. Not that I saw. Poirot moved to the window, studying the rain-smeared glass. And yet someone must have gone after her, n'est-ce pas? Because she did not dance alone, and she did not die alone. Lady Isabel rose from her seat, her composure momentarily cracking. Monsieur Poirot, are you suggesting that someone here, one of my guests, is a murderer? Poirot turned gently toward her. Madame, I suggest only that truth is like the sun. One may draw the curtains, but one cannot stop the light. The inspector cleared his throat. You intend to question the household, I take it? Mais oui, Poirot said softly. The guests, the servants, even the orchestra, perhaps. Everyone who heard the music of that fatal hour. He began his work immediately. The interviews took place in the small morning room overlooking the garden. The first was the housemaid, Elsie Grant, pale and trembling as she clutched her apron. I saw Miss Marianne on the terrace, sir, she whispered. She were talking to someone. I didn't see who, but I heard her voice. She sounded angry. Poirot leaned forward. Angry? Not frightened? No, sir. Angry. Like she'd been lied to. And how long after that did you hear the scream? Only a minute or two, sir. Poirot thanked her gently, and when she had gone, he sat back in thought. A quarrel, then. But with whom? By noon, he had spoken with every guest still at the hall. Their accounts were precise, polite, and nearly identical. Too identical, Poirot thought. Human memory, in its nature, was untidy. Truth rarely marched in step. Yet here, every recollection moved in perfect unison, as though rehearsed. It was near luncheon when he returned once more to the terrace. The sky had cleared, and sunlight touched the stone where Marianne had fallen. He bent down, inspecting the pattern of rain-dried patches. There, near the wall, the faint outline of a footprint, smaller than a man's, too narrow for a woman's dancing shoe. Poirot's expression changed slightly, though his voice, when he spoke, was soft as ever. Ah, voilà, the first whisper of disorder. He straightened, brushing the dust from his sleeve. So, the waltz continues, but now it plays a different tune. Poirot remained on the terrace long after the sun had climbed higher, the faint outline of the small footprint fixed in his mind like a single note in a melody that refused to resolve. He crouched again, tracing the print with one gloved fingertip. The soil was fine, almost silken, disturbed only where the heel had pressed deeper than the rest. A light step, but decisive. Not a woman's dancing slipper, nor a man's polished shoe. Something practical, utilitarian, a servant's perhaps, or someone who wished to appear as one. He rose and turned toward the open doors leading back into the ballroom. The echoes of the night before seemed to linger in the air, the ghost of a waltz, faint perfume, a smudge of powder on a marble pillar. Poirot's gaze swept the room like a slow tide. Every trace of movement spoke to him. The overturned chair near the west wall, the faint scuff beneath the window, the missing candlestick from the far mantel. Tiny things, perhaps, yet it was always the tiny things that betrayed great lies. Lady Isabel entered softly, her footsteps inaudible on the carpet. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low. The servants are distressed. They ask if they may go. The police have said they are free to leave. Poirot turned. And yet, madame, one among them may hold the truth. Permit me a little time before they depart. Truth, you see, is a delicate flower. It wilts when hurried. She nodded, though her eyes were shadowed with fatigue. Do what you must. I only ask that you be discreet. Marianne's name must not become a spectacle. Poirot inclined his head. Discretion, madame, is my constant companion. When she had gone, He summoned Inspector Graves. The man arrived with his usual impatience, brushing past the doorway with a muttered greeting. "Still finding poetry and footprints, Monsieur Poirot? The coroner's verdict will be read this afternoon. You might want to have something more tangible than theories." Poirot smiled faintly. "Mon cher Graves, in this life, it is not the tangible that deceives us. It is the invisible. Tell me, has anyone accounted for the movements of the butler, Mr. Carter, between 11 and midnight?" The inspector frowned. "Carter? He was supervising the champagne service, wasn't he?" "So he claims," said Poirot softly. "Yet I find that 2 bottles were opened before the clock struck 11 and none after. The guests recall no refilling of glasses during that final waltz. It seems our good Carter vanished precisely when Mademoiselle left the dance floor." Graves blinked. "You're saying the butler killed her?" Poirot spread his hands. "No, no. I say only that the rhythm of his duties was interrupted, and when the rhythm falters, one must ask who altered the tune." As they spoke, a sudden clatter echoed from the adjoining corridor. Poirot turned sharply. A maid appeared in the doorway, pale and breathless, her hands trembling. "Sir, Inspector, please, you must come. The gardener's shed, it's been broken into." Moments later, they crossed the damp lawn to the row of outbuildings near the orchard. The door to the shed hung askew, the lock forced. Inside, among the tools and oil tins, lay a man's coat, torn at the sleeve, streaked with mud. Poirot lifted it delicately with his cane. The monogram on the inner lining read, J.H. "Julian Harwood," murmured the inspector grimly. Poirot said nothing. He merely observed the cut on the fabric. The mud dried unevenly at the hem, as though the wearer had knelt on wet ground. On the workbench nearby, a small handkerchief lay crumpled, a woman's embroidered with white lilies. Poirot picked it up, turning it slowly in the light. "The garden," he said softly. "Always the garden, a place of beauty and of concealment. Tell me, Graves, when you searched the grounds last night, did you look beneath the rose arbor?" The inspector hesitated. "We checked the perimeter, yes, but not—" "Ah." Poirot nodded once, satisfied. "Then perhaps, before we permit anyone to leave this charming house, we shall do so now." They walked together along the narrow path lined with hydrangeas, the silence broken only by the crunch of gravel. The rose arbor stood half in shadow, its leaves still heavy with rain. Beneath it, hidden among the roots, lay a small velvet pouch. Poirot bent and lifted it carefully. Inside were 3 things: a broken earring, a folded scrap of paper, and a single pearl. He unfolded the paper, his expression tightening ever so slightly as his eyes moved across the lines. It was a fragment of a letter, torn at the edges, the handwriting delicate but hurried. "If you tell him what you saw, everything will be ruined. Meet me by the terrace before midnight. We must end this." Poirot refolded the note and placed it in his pocket. The inspector's face was hard. "So she was blackmailing someone?" "Perhaps," Poirot murmured. "Or perhaps she was being silenced. The difference, mon ami, lies in the direction of fear." He turned toward the great house again, its windows gleaming in the pale light. "It is time," he said quietly, "to listen once more to the music of that night. Every guest has played their part. Now we must hear the missing verse." The house stood quiet when Poirot returned from the garden, the velvet pouch concealed carefully within his pocket. The faint aroma of polish and wilted roses filled the hall, mingling with the chill of early afternoon. Lady Isabel's guests had retreated to their rooms, some out of shock, others out of guilt, each one wrapped in silence that was beginning to feel rehearsed. Poirot found Inspector Graves waiting in the drawing-room, pacing near the fireplace like a man chasing the end of a thought. "Well?" Graves demanded the moment Poirot entered. "You've found her letter, the pearl, the earring. You can't tell me that doesn't prove something." Poirot's reply came softly. It proves that the night spoke in whispers. Yes, but to whom it whispered, that we do not yet know. Graves frowned. You're saying she wasn't blackmailing anyone? The tone of the letter, "We must end this," sounds to me like a threat. Poirot tilted his head. Or a plea. Sometimes, Inspector, desperation wears the mask of menace. It is the way of human hearts. He walked slowly to the window, gazing out at the garden. The earring, one only, not two. That suggests a struggle, does it not? Yet there were no marks upon her arms, no sign she fought. Tell me, Graves, what kind of quarrel leaves no sound? Graves grunted, frustrated. A quiet one, I suppose. Ah, Poirot turned, eyes bright. Exactly. A quiet quarrel, perhaps spoken in lowered voices, meant not to be overheard. A quarrel of lovers or of conspirators, and if it took place before midnight, then someone heard more than they should. He crossed to the sideboard where the music box lay. Its silver casing caught the dull light, the heart shape gleaming faintly. Poirot pressed the mechanism once. The familiar tune began to play. Slow, lilting, but slightly off, as though the melody had learned sorrow overnight. "The birthday waltz," he murmured. "A charming choice for a farewell. Tell me, Inspector, has anyone claimed ownership of this?" "No one," Graves said. "Lady Isabel says it was a childhood gift, but it's been in a drawer for years." "Ah, and yet it reappears on the night of her death. Someone wished her to remember something, perhaps, or someone wished to remind her of guilt." Poirot's fingers tapped the casing rhythmically. "The waltz begins, the young lady leaves the floor, and this music waits for her outside. Coincidence, Inspector, is merely the refuge of lazy minds." Graves scowled. "Then what do you suppose it means?" Poirot did not answer directly. He glanced toward the door, where a faint sound stirred. The shuffle of careful footsteps. Elsie, the maid, stood hesitantly in the threshold, twisting her apron in her hands. "Speak, ma petite," Poirot said gently. "You have remembered something, non?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. It's about the terrace last night. After Miss Marianne went out, I thought I saw someone following. Not from the ballroom, but from the side corridor near the servants' stairs." Poirot's voice softened. "And who was it you saw?" She hesitated, then whispered, "I'm not sure, sir. It was dark, but I think it was Mr. Carter." The inspector straightened. The butler again. Poirot raised a finger. "Calmly, my friend. The mind must not rush where the heart trembles. We shall speak to this Mr. Carter." Moments later, the butler entered. Tall, composed, his hands folded neatly before him. Only his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Poirot regarded him with polite curiosity. "Monsieur Carter, we are told you left your duties during the waltz. You were seen near the servants' stairs. Will you tell us why?" Carter's jaw tightened. "I was attending to a matter in the pantry, sir. One of the bottles had gone missing." Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "Ah, then the bottle disappeared, and you went to seek it in the darkness." A pause. "Yes, sir." "Curious," said Poirot, almost to himself, "for I've discovered that the missing bottle was found, empty, in the gardener's shed. Tell me, do you often drink champagne among the tools?" Carter's composure faltered. I don't know how it came there, sir." Poirot smiled kindly, as though soothing a child. "No, perhaps you do not. And yet, someone wished us to think that you did." Graves looked baffled. "Then who?" Poirot did not answer. He moved instead to the mantel, adjusting the candlesticks into perfect symmetry. "You see, mon ami, it is not the butler who interests me now. It is the shadow that walks behind him, the one who hides in reflection, not in sight. There is always one, you know, the unseen partner in every dance." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And before this day ends, I think we shall discover who led Marianne Charnwood to her final waltz. The butler's departure left the air strangely heavy, as if his very restraint had drawn a curtain over the room. Poirot remained by the mantelpiece, fingers lightly resting on the edge of the marble, his reflection caught between the two candlesticks he had so carefully straightened. Inspector Graves leaned against the door frame, arms folded, impatience flickering in every line of his stance. "So, we're back to shadows and music boxes," Graves said at last. "You've proved the butler lied, perhaps. But what does that bring us? No sign of a struggle, no witnesses, and half the house too frightened to speak plainly." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Patience, my friend. The truth is like the melody of a waltz. It cannot be hurried. One must let it find its rhythm." He turned to the window again, eyes drifting across the grounds. "Consider, Graves. The letter spoke of secrecy, of something to be ended. The earring tells us there was movement, a small but deliberate contact. The music box, sentiment reborn after years of silence. These are the symbols of emotion, not accident. Love, jealousy, fear. Each step of our waltz is human, not mechanical." Graves frowned. "And where does that leave us?" Poirot smiled faintly. "With motive, perhaps, but not yet with truth. For that, we must listen to the heartbeats of those still within these walls." As if on cue, a soft knock came at the drawing-room door. Lady Isabel entered, her poise perfectly restored, though the pallor of sleeplessness lingered beneath her eyes. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector," she began, "I have received word from Dr. Langley. He will arrive this evening to perform the inquest, but I confess—" Her voice faltered slightly. "I cannot bear another night under this roof unless I know what happened to my daughter." Poirot moved toward her, his tone tender. "Madame, we approach that knowledge, I promise you. Tell me, did your daughter ever confide in you about her engagement? Was she happy with Monsieur Harwood?" Lady Isabel hesitated, looking toward the garden where the rose arbor shimmered faintly in the sunlight. "She said little. Marianne was affectionate, yes, but reserved. I believed she loved Julian, though lately—" She paused. "There was a change, a quietness. Once I asked her if something troubled her, and she said, 'Only, I've made a mistake, Mamma, but I can still make it right.'" Poirot inclined his head slightly. "And she did not explain?" "No, and I did not press her. I thought it was the nerves of youth." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "The silence of youth can be fatal, madame. It leaves too much room for imagination." When she had gone, he remained motionless for several moments, lost in thought. Then, abruptly, he turned to Graves. "Summon Monsieur Harwood. We must speak to him once more, this time as two men who have looked upon the face of death." Julian Harwood entered a short while later, his expression strained, his eyes reddened from sleeplessness. He carried himself with that forced composure of a man who wishes to appear calm, but fears every word he utters might condemn him. Poirot gestured toward the chair opposite. "Sit, if you please. We shall speak as friends. The night is behind us, but its music still plays. No?" Julian gave a faint, bitter smile. "If it is music, Monsieur Poirot, it is not one I wish to hear again. Nevertheless, we must listen. Tell me, what was it that your fiancée learned about you? You told me she said she could not marry you, that she had learned something. From whom, monsieur?" Julian hesitated, then ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know. Someone had been speaking to her, poisoning her mind. She became distant these last weeks. I tried to confront her, but she would only say, 'Ask your friend.'" "Your friend?" Poirot repeated quietly. "Which friend?" "Arthur Fielding," Julian said. "We were at school together. He's been staying here since last month. But Marianne trusted him. Too much, perhaps." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Ah, the gallant captain. Always the one near the dance floor, yes? Tell me, did you quarrel with him?" Julian's silence was answer enough. Poirot rose, pacing slowly, hands clasped behind his back. "It is a very old story, monsieur. 2 men, 1 woman, a heart divided by loyalty and deceit. But I wonder, who held the greater secret? You, who feared exposure, or he who desired silence?" Julian looked up, startled. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing," Poirot said softly. "Not yet. Only this, that when the music stopped, 1 man followed her onto the terrace. Perhaps it was you, perhaps another, but one among you wished that waltz to end forever." He turned toward the door. "Come, Graves, let us have a word with Captain Fielding. I suspect his tune, too, will sound slightly out of key." Captain Arthur Fielding was found on the veranda, a cigarette between his fingers, the smoke curling up into the dull afternoon light. His jacket hung loosely on his frame, and his gaze lingered on the mist beyond the lawns as though he were watching something invisible moving across it. When Poirot and Inspector Graves approached, he turned with a faint, tired smile that did not reach his eyes. "Ah," he said quietly. "The Inquisition continues." Poirot's tone was light but precise. "Only a conversation, mon capitaine. I find it helps to speak plainly, especially when others do not." Fielding gave a short, humorless laugh. "Then you're speaking to the wrong crowd. Charnwood Hall has always been built on half-truths and good manners." "Perhaps," Poirot agreed, "but good manners cannot disguise bad conscience. Sit, if you please." Fielding obeyed, flicking the ash from his cigarette into a nearby urn. Poirot stood before him, his expression mild, but his gaze unwavering. "You knew Mademoiselle Charnwood since childhood, I believe?" "Yes," Fielding said. "Her father and mine served together. We grew up around each other. I've always cared for her." Poirot nodded slightly. "Ah, you cared for her. And yet she was to marry another man." Fielding's mouth tightened. "Julian Harwood was not worthy of her. He's a gambler, Poirot. Charming on the surface, but rotten underneath. She found out. That's what the argument was about." Poirot tilted his head. "And you told her?" Fielding hesitated. "I thought she had a right to know." "Indeed. And did you also think she would end the engagement? That perhaps you might step into his place?" The captain's eyes flashed. "You twist everything, don't you? I was trying to protect her." Poirot's tone softened. "Of course. Protection, such a noble motive. And yet, so often it is love disguised as control. Tell me, mon capitaine, did you follow her onto the terrace?" Fielding stiffened, his gaze flicking briefly toward the garden. "No. I went to the library to fetch her shawl. She had left it on the back of a chair. When I returned, there was already a commotion outside." Inspector Graves made a note, his pencil scratching faintly. "Anyone see you in the library?" Fielding shook his head. "No, but you'll find the shawl still there if it matters." Poirot's fingers tapped lightly against his sleeve. "Perhaps it does. Perhaps it tells us you were elsewhere than you claim. You see, there is one detail that troubles me. When we found the music box beside her body, its lid was open. The mechanism had wound down halfway through the tune. Only one person in the house would have known that the key sticks slightly at the 3rd turn." Fielding frowned. "What are you implying?" "That you had handled it before," Poirot said softly. "That you had once given it to her, or taken it from her." For the first time, the captain's composure faltered. He dropped his gaze, jaw working silently before he muttered, "It was mine once. I bought it years ago in Vienna. A gift. I meant to give it to her on her 21st birthday, but before I could, she told me she was engaged to Harwood. I threw it away. I never saw it again until last night." "Threw it away," Poirot repeated, his voice a whisper. "And yet, it found its way back into her hands. Curious, n'est-ce pas?" Graves leaned forward. "Are you saying she kept it all these years?" Poirot did not answer at once. His gaze drifted to the horizon where the mist had begun to thicken again over the trees. Perhaps she kept it, perhaps another did. What matters is who wound it last, and when. Fielding rose abruptly. I've told you everything I know. If you're implying I killed her, you're wrong. Marianne was the only person I ever... He stopped himself, pressing his lips together. I can't do this again. Poirot inclined his head gently. No, mon capitaine, you cannot. But others can, and they will. You see, the truth always seeks a way to breathe, even through silence. When Fielding had gone, Graves turned to Poirot. You believe him? Poirot smiled faintly. I believe he believes himself, but belief is a poor substitute for truth. There is something theatrical in this crime, my friend. Every gesture arranged, every clue displayed like scenery upon a stage. Someone in this house conducts the waltz still, and we, alas, are dancing to their rhythm. He turned toward the staircase, his steps deliberate, unhurried. Come, Inspector. There is one person we have not yet spoken to. The one who never danced at all. I should like to meet Lady Isabel's companion. Lady Isabel's companion, Miss Clara Vale, was a woman one might easily overlook. She had the unobtrusive manner of someone long accustomed to moving in another's shadow. Quiet where others spoke, deferential where others commanded. Yet, when Poirot entered the morning parlour where she sat arranging correspondence, her composure was so precise that it seemed deliberate, almost studied. She rose immediately, smoothing her plain grey dress, her eyes meeting his with the polite wariness of someone who has already guessed why she has been summoned. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly, her ladyship said you might wish to speak with me. I will help as best I can. Poirot inclined his head, studying her closely. Ah, très bien, Mademoiselle Vale. You have the look of one who sees everything and speaks of nothing, the rarest of gifts. Sit, if you please. We shall speak quietly, yes? She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. If you're asking whether I know who killed Miss Marianne, she said, I do not. I wish I did. Lady Isabel has been kind to me. I would not wish her to suffer longer than she already has. Poirot's gaze softened, though his tone remained sharp beneath the gentleness. You were here the entire evening, were you not? Near Lady Isabel, attending her? Yes, Miss Vale said. I remained in the drawing-room while the dancing went on. Lady Isabel's nerves are delicate. She does not like to be left alone. Ah, and yet you heard the music, I imagine. The laughter, the sound of the terrace, doors opening and closing. Her eyes flickered. Yes, I remember the moment Miss Marianne left the ballroom. I could hear the orchestra pause, then begin again. The waltz. She hesitated. I remember it because the tune seemed different, slower. Perhaps I only imagined it, but it felt as though the rhythm itself faltered for a moment. Poirot smiled faintly. You have a good ear, mademoiselle. Music often falters when hearts do. Tell me, did you notice anyone else leaving through the west corridor after her? Miss Vale looked down at her hands. I thought I saw Captain Fielding pass by a few minutes later. He moved quickly, as if he wished not to be seen, but I told myself it was nothing. Ah, said Poirot softly. And later, when the scream came, she closed her eyes briefly. It was dreadful. Lady Isabel fainted. I fetched smelling salts. When I returned, the house was chaos. Poirot nodded slowly, walking a few paces across the room. Mademoiselle, I will tell you something that perhaps you already know. It is not the lies of others that trouble me most. It is the half-truths of the honest. They hide more cleverly. Her breath caught, and for the first time her composure faltered. Half-truths? She repeated faintly. Yes, said Poirot. For example, you say you remained near Lady Isabel all evening, but one of the maids, Mademoiselle Elsie, has told me she saw you near the west staircase, some 20 minutes before the scream. That would be near the servants' corridor leading to the terrace, n'est-ce pas? Miss Vale's fingers tightened around her handkerchief. Yes, that is true. Lady Isabel sent me to fetch her fan from the conservatory. I passed near the corridor but did not go outside. Ah, Poirot murmured, but you could have, if you wished, and perhaps you did. Perhaps you saw more than you admit. Her face paled. No, Monsieur Poirot, I swear. He lifted a hand gently. Calm yourself. I do not accuse. I only observe. You are loyal to Lady Isabel, yes? Deeply loyal. One might even say, devoted? Something unreadable flickered in her expression, a shadow of feeling quickly suppressed. She has been my benefactress for 10 years, she said quietly. I owe her everything. Poirot studied her for a long moment. Then he said, And what of Marianne? You owed her nothing, perhaps? That struck home. Her lips trembled. She was difficult at times, impulsive. She could be cruel without meaning to, but she was young, and I tried not to judge her. Poirot nodded slowly as though satisfied. And yet, you judged her enough to pity Lady Isabel, enough, perhaps, to wish her rid of a daughter who caused her pain. She looked up sharply. That's monstrous. Oui, said Poirot, his voice a murmur. Monstrous, and therefore possible. You see, Mademoiselle Vale, crimes are rarely born of hatred alone. They are born of love. Twisted, wounded love. The love that suffocates rather than protects. The silence that followed was long. Poirot let it stretch until it became unbearable, until Miss Vale looked away first. When he spoke again, it was almost tender. If you recall anything more, even something small, you will tell me, yes? Her voice was barely audible. Yes, I will. Poirot inclined his head. Bon. Then perhaps the music will soon cease, and we shall know who composed its final note. As he left the room, Inspector Graves followed close behind, muttering, You think she's involved? Poirot smiled faintly. She knows something she cannot say, but not of guilt, of protection. The question, my friend, is whom she protects, the mother or the murderer. Poirot and Inspector Graves walked together down the long corridor, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. The afternoon light had faded to a cool, uncertain glow, the kind that seemed to turn every reflection in the gilt-framed mirrors into something slightly ghostly. The air inside Charnwood Hall felt charged, as though the very walls listened. Graves broke the silence first, his voice low but edged with skepticism. You're giving too much weight to that companion's nerves, Poirot. She's frightened, yes, but that doesn't make her guilty. Half the women in this house are trembling, and the other half are lying to protect them. Poirot smiled faintly, not looking at him. You are correct, mon ami. Fear and guilt are not twins, but they share the same eyes. Miss Vale's fear is not of exposure, but of consequence. Someone she loves stands upon a precipice, and she holds her silence as though it could keep them from falling. Graves frowned. You mean Lady Isabel? Perhaps, said Poirot softly. Or perhaps another. We must remember, the heart is loyal to its own secrets. Loyalty and love can cross in dangerous ways. They reached the great hall where the portraits of Charnwood ancestors hung in solemn rows. Poirot stopped before one, an oil painting of a stern man with a sword at his side and eyes too alive to be merely paint. Regardez, Poirot murmured. The father of the late Lady Isabel's husband, a face of command, of silence, of control. The family tradition, it seems, continues. Graves snorted. You're reading ghosts now. No, my friend, I read people, and people are never truly dead when their habits remain. At that moment, the heavy front doors creaked open. A man in a dark overcoat entered, carrying a small medical case. His hair was graying, his expression brisk and businesslike. Lady Isabel followed him, pale and composed. Dr. Langley, she said. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Graves. This is our family physician. He has come for the inquest. Poirot bowed politely. Enchanted, Doctor, though I fear your role today will not be pleasant. Langley sighed. Death rarely is, monsieur. Still, I must do my duty. They walked together toward the drawing room, where the body of Marianne Charnwood had been kept before the coroner's men arrived. The doctor opened his case, arranging his instruments with mechanical care. Poirot watched, his gaze not on the tools but on the man's movements, efficient, steady, almost detached. After several minutes of quiet examination, Langley straightened. "A broken neck," he said simply. "The fall was fatal, but there is one oddity. There are faint bruises at the base of the throat. Not enough to strangle, but enough to suggest she was seized before she fell." Lady Isabel's hand went to her lips. Graves looked sharply at Poirot. "Then she was pushed," the inspector said. "Not necessarily," Poirot murmured. "But it is suggestive. Merci, doctor. Tell me, these bruises, could they have been made by small hands?" Langley hesitated. "Possibly. A woman's grip, or even a man's who did not mean to harm." Poirot nodded slowly. "Ah, then intent and accident dance closely together, do they not?" When the doctor had left, Lady Isabel lingered by the doorway, her voice unsteady. "Monsieur Poirot, if it was not an accident, then who could have done such a thing? Everyone loved Marianne." Poirot turned toward her gently. "Did they, madame? Love is a word of many disguises. Some love because they wish to possess, others because they wish to protect. And sometimes," his eyes softened, "sometimes love cannot bear to lose." She said nothing, but her fingers trembled around her handkerchief. Poirot's eyes caught it. Fine lace, monogrammed with the same white lilies embroidered on the one found in the gardener's shed. The faintest flicker passed across his face, but he said nothing. As she withdrew, Graves leaned closer. "You saw it, didn't you? The handkerchief. You think it's hers?" Poirot's voice was barely a whisper. "I think it once belonged to her daughter." The inspector's brow furrowed. "Then why would Lady Isabel have it now?" "Because," said Poirot quietly, "she went to the terrace that night. Whether before or after the fall, we must still learn, but she was there." They stood in silence, the truth beginning to take form like a shape emerging from mist. Poirot's eyes drifted once more to the grand staircase. "We are close, mon ami. The dance nears its final measure. One false step remains, and then the last note will play." Graves exhaled heavily. "And you think Lady Isabel made that step?" Poirot's lips curved faintly. "Perhaps she took it, or perhaps she watched someone else take it and said nothing. Either way, I fear her silence is as deadly as any hand that pushed." The inspector's expression darkened. "Then what now?" Poirot adjusted his cuffs with precision. "Now, we return to the ballroom, the place where joy became tragedy. I must see the floor once more, for I believe the waltz did not end where everyone thinks it did. It may be, my friend, that Marianne Charnwood did not fall by chance, but by choreography." The ballroom had grown colder since that night, though no window stood open. Poirot entered first, his polished shoes silent against the parquet floor that had once echoed with laughter and waltz steps. The chandeliers above hung motionless, their crystal facets catching faint glimmers of the afternoon light. For a moment, he stood utterly still, gazing at the mirrored walls as though expecting the reflections themselves to confess. Inspector Graves followed behind, muttering about drafts and ghosts, but Poirot raised one delicate hand for silence. "You hear it, mon ami," he whispered. Graves frowned. "Hear what?" "There's nothing." "Precisely," Poirot replied. "The silence is too exact. No echo, no resonance. But the ballroom is like the human heart. It hides its scars beneath polish. Let us see what secrets it conceals." He moved with meticulous care, scanning the floor, the chairs, the walls. The faint scuff marks from the dance were still visible, though dulled by the servants' attempts to clean. Poirot crouched near the west side, close to the doors leading to the terrace. His fingertip brushed a faint streak upon the marble threshold. Wax, pale pink, just visible in the slanting light. Candle wax, he murmured. But from where? Graves leaned over his shoulder. From one of the chandeliers, surely. No, Poirot said softly. The wax is tinted. The shade of Lady Isabel's candles, the ones kept in her private sitting room. She told me last evening that she never permits them to leave her quarters. And yet, voila. He gestured to the smear on the floor. One was carried here. Graves exhaled. You think she came here after the death? Not after, said Poirot. Before. He stood, his eyes narrowing. Do you recall, Graves, that the music faltered, that Miss Vale mentioned a hesitation in the waltz? That was the moment when the candle was set down. Someone arranged the scene, knowing the girl would step outside, a light, perhaps, to guide her, or to blind her. Graves scratched his chin. Then whoever brought the candle led her to the terrace. Exactly. Poirot's tone sharpened. The killer did not pursue. They waited. The terrace was not a place of flight. It was a stage. Our poor Mademoiselle Marianne walked willingly into her own tragedy, drawn by something or someone she trusted. A sound broke the stillness. Footsteps behind them. Poirot turned to see Lady Isabel in the doorway, her face pale but composed, her gloved hands clasped before her. I thought I might find you here, she said quietly. This room feels haunted. Every note of that waltz still rings in my head. Poirot bowed slightly. It is often so, madame. Memory clings to the air. But tell me, do you recall anything unusual that night? Any small thing? A sound, a gesture, a glance? Her lips trembled faintly. Only that she was restless. I knew something troubled her. I meant to speak to her after the dance, but then she stopped, her voice catching. Poirot's tone remained gentle. And the candle, madame? The one from your sitting room. How did it come to be here? Her eyes widened. What candle? The pink wax upon the threshold, Poirot said softly. Surely you see, madame. It is not common wax from the ballroom, but of your private supply. You told me yourself that none but you touch them. There was a long pause. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corridor seemed suddenly thunderous. At last she said, almost in a whisper, "Then it was I." Graves started. "You admit?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I did not harm her. I brought the candle because she asked me to. She sent a note just before the supper. It said, 'Mama, come to the terrace when the waltz begins. Bring one of your candles. It is important.' I thought it strange, but I obeyed. I placed it near the railing and went to fetch her shawl. When I returned," her voice faltered, "she was gone." Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden clarity. "And the note, you still have it?" She hesitated, then withdrew a folded scrap of paper from her reticule. Poirot unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was hurried, slanted, but elegant. Marianne's. Or so it seemed. "Inspector," Poirot said quietly, "you will see at once that this letter was written by a woman's hand. But look closer, observe the pressure at the tail of the M, the uneven line of ink. This was not Marianne's writing. It was traced." Graves blinked. "Traced? Oui. Someone used her old letters as a guide. A deception, precise but mechanical. The hand that wrote this was not emotional. It was deliberate." Lady Isabel swayed slightly, her voice a whisper. Then she was lured. Poirot's gaze met hers, unwavering. Lured, yes, by the promise of reconciliation, or perhaps by fear of exposure. But do not blame yourself, madam. The hand that wrote this belonged to one who knew both your heart and hers." He folded the note, sliding it into his pocket. "Come, Graves, we must find Captain Fielding once more. I believe the time has come for him to answer a question only he can." As they left the ballroom, the faint echo of a waltz seemed to stir again in the distance. Soft, ghostly, unfinished. Poirot paused at the threshold, glancing back once, his eyes dark with thought. "The candle, the letter, the music," he murmured. 3 steps of a dance, each leading closer to the truth. But now the music changes. It is not a waltz anymore. It is a dirge. They found Captain Fielding in the library, seated beside the great oak hearth, staring into the dying embers as though they held the answer to every question he could not bear to voice aloud. The smoke hung motionless in the air, the faint scent of ash and brandy mingling with the faint perfume of damp wool from his discarded coat. He did not rise when Poirot and Inspector Graves entered. He merely turned his head slightly, the ghost of defiance flickering in his eyes. "I suppose," he said quietly, "you've come to ask me what terrible thing I've done now." Poirot advanced with measured calm. "We come not to accuse, mon capitaine, but to listen, though I fear that what you have not said already speaks too loudly to be ignored." Fielding gave a sharp, weary laugh. "You mean the note, don't you? You found it?" Poirot's expression did not change. "Ah, so you knew of it. Then it was you who sent it to Lady Isabel?" The captain's silence was an answer of its own. The inspector stepped forward, but Poirot lifted a hand. "Gently, Graves. Let him speak. The truth, you see, is like a fragile bird. It flies farther when not startled." For a moment, Fielding said nothing. The only sound was the faint crackle of the hearth. Then he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Yes, I wrote it. I traced her handwriting. I thought, if Lady Isabel believed Marianne wanted to see her, she'd go out to the terrace, and then she'd find us there. Marianne and I." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I wanted her to see that I wasn't her enemy, that I loved her daughter, that we meant to be honest about everything." Poirot studied him with quiet intensity. "And yet, my friend, honesty delivered by deceit is still deceit. You played with emotion as one plays with fire, and now you stand in the ashes." Fielding's hands clenched. "I never meant for her to die. She was afraid, Poirot. Afraid of what would happen when her mother found out she was ending the engagement with Harwood. That's why she wanted to meet in secret. I only meant to comfort her, to help her tell the truth. And yet she fell," Poirot murmured. "You quarreled?" Fielding's head bowed. "No, she was crying. I tried to calm her. She turned toward the railing. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away and—" He broke off, pressing a hand to his eyes. "It all happened too fast. She slipped. That's the truth. God help me. It's the truth." Inspector Graves moved closer. "Then why not tell us this before?" Fielding's voice was hoarse. "Because of Lady Isabel. I knew what it would do to her if she thought Marianne died in my company. She's hated me for years, ever since my father lost their money in that dreadful investment. She would have believed I pushed her." Poirot nodded slowly. "So you kept silent and let suspicion fall upon others? The butler, the maid, even your friend Harwood." "I didn't ask for this," Fielding said fiercely. "But yes, I lied. I thought I could bear the guilt if it meant protecting her." Poirot regarded him for a long time, then turned toward the fireplace. "Ah, you English and your noble lies. You think they can be carried like medals, quiet burdens worn upon the soul, but they do not sit still, mon capitaine. They shift, they burn, they reveal themselves in time." Fielding rose abruptly, his voice cracking. "Then what now? Do you mean to have me arrested? For what? For loving her too much?" Poirot's eyes softened. "No, monsieur. For cowardice, perhaps. But cowardice is its own punishment. He stepped closer, his tone grave but not unkind. Marianne's death was not murder, but it was not mere accident either. It was the consequence of deceit. Small lies woven so tightly that truth could no longer breathe. Graves looked uncertain. So we let him go. Poirot's gaze lingered on the captain's face, where remorse had already carved its verdict. He will not go far, I think. Some prisons have no walls. Fielding said nothing more. He only sank back into the chair, staring at the fire that had begun to fade into grey. Poirot turned toward the door, his steps soundless, his eyes distant. In the corridor outside, Lady Isabel waited. When Poirot met her gaze, she read the answer without words. Her hand went to her throat. Her face seemed to age in that instant, though her voice, when it came, was soft and steady. So it was an accident, she whispered, but built upon lies. Yes, madame, Poirot said quietly. The waltz ended not with violence, but with pride. Two hearts out of rhythm, each too proud to speak their truth. And so the music ceased. She closed her eyes. Then there will be no justice. Poirot inclined his head gently. There will be peace, perhaps. And that is the greater mercy. The dead, you see, do not ask for vengeance, only understanding. As he stepped out into the evening air, the wind stirred faintly across the lawns. Somewhere within the house, a piano key sounded. A single accidental note, then silence. Poirot paused, listening. Ah, he murmured to himself. At last, the final chord. The next morning, Charnwood Hall lay wrapped in a hush that felt almost reverent, as if the house itself wished not to disturb what had been settled in the night. A faint mist clung to the gardens, softening the sharp edges of the statues and hedgerows. Inside, the servants moved quietly, their footsteps careful, their voices hushed. In the drawing-room, the last of the formalities were being concluded. Captain Fielding had given his statement. Inspector Graves had sent his report to the coroner. The case, at least in the eyes of the law, was closed. Hercule Poirot sat alone by the window, his hands folded neatly before him, his gaze turned toward the fading outline of the terrace. His expression was one of grave reflection, tinged with that familiar melancholy that often followed his triumphs. Graves entered a few minutes later, hat in hand, looking weary but thoughtful. "It's done," the inspector said. "Fielding's account holds. No contradiction in the evidence. The girl slipped just as he said. An accident, though a tragic one." Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, tragic indeed. But you know, my friend, it is curious how often the word accident is used to comfort the living, not to describe the truth." Graves frowned. "You don't mean to say, after all that you still doubt his story?" Poirot smiled faintly, though his eyes never left the window. No, I do not doubt it. But there is more than one kind of guilt, mon ami. The law sees only the hand that acts. I, perhaps foolishly, see also the heart that permits." He rose then, adjusting his cuffs, his movements as precise as ever. "Before I depart, there is one last courtesy to pay. Lady Isabel has asked to speak with me." He found her in the conservatory, sitting beside a vase of wilted roses. The morning light fell gently on her face, revealing lines that seemed deeper than the day before. She looked up as Poirot entered, her composure fragile but still proud. "Thank you for coming, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "I needed to see you before you go." He bowed his head. "Of course, madame." She hesitated. "The inspector tells me the matter is closed. I should feel relieved, but I do not. There is something in your eyes that says otherwise." Poirot regarded her quietly. "You are perceptive, madame. I will tell you only this. Captain Fielding spoke the truth, yet not the whole of it. Mademoiselle Marianne did indeed fall, but not merely from accident. It was despair that loosened her hold, despair born of a secret too heavy to carry. Lady Isabel's breath caught. Despair? What secret? Poirot's voice was gentle. She discovered that the man she loved, the gallant captain, was not free to love her in return. He had promised his loyalty elsewhere, years before, in gratitude to another who had saved his family from ruin. Her eyes widened. You mean, to me? Poirot inclined his head slightly. Oui, madame. The debt between your late husband and the Fielding family was paid long ago, but the promise remained. The captain could not refuse you, even in silence. It was you he obeyed when you forbade the match, though he believed himself acting from duty rather than fear. Your daughter saw that. She saw love twisted into obligation, and it broke her heart. Lady Isabel covered her face with trembling hands. I thought I was protecting her. I thought I knew what was best. Poirot's tone softened, almost tender. Ah, but love, madame, is the most dangerous waltz of all. It makes us blind to the steps we lead. Marianne did not fall by accident. She fell because every path before her was closed, and when she reached for help, no one's hand was free to take. Hers. For a long moment, Lady Isabel said nothing. The light shifted across the floor, touching the edges of the room in silence. Then, quietly, she asked, "And now? What am I to do with this truth?" Poirot looked at her gently. "You will live, madame. You will forgive. And perhaps one day you will let the music play again." He bowed deeply, and as he turned to leave, the faint chime of the music box drifted from the mantelpiece, the soft, trembling notes of the birthday waltz. Poirot paused at the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Strange, is it not?" he murmured. "How the heart remembers even when reason forgets." He stepped out into the hall, his figure framed for a moment in the pale morning light before the door closed behind him. Outside, the mist was lifting. The lawns of Charnwood Hall glistened faintly, the sky clearing above the quiet estate. Poirot paused at the gravel path, his gaze drawn once more to the terrace where it had all begun. Then, with a small sigh, he adjusted his hat and walked away, the measured rhythm of his steps fading softly into the distance. Behind him, the music box played its final note, and was still. The end.